The Valyrians. The Valyrians began as nothing remarkable, a community of shepherds on a great peninsula in the east, tending flocks in the shadow of a chain of volcanoes called the 14 Flames. Not conquerors, not sorcerers, shepherds. And then, deep in those mountains, they found the dragons. The Valyrians believed they had woken the dragons out of the volcanoes and learned to bend them. Others believed the dragons were bred, shaped over generations from something already sleeping in the deep places of the earth. Either way, the result was the same. With dragons, the Valyrians did what men with dragons always do. They conquered. They went to war against the old empire of the east, the Giscari, a civilization that was ancient when Valyria was young, and they did not merely defeat it. They erased it. 5 times the Giscari rose against them and were burned down. And on the last, they pulled the great city of Old Gis down, stone by stone, and burned the very books so that the language itself would die. A civilization thousands of years old, deleted from the world. In its place, the Valyrians built an empire that stretched across most of the known East, and to work it, they took slaves in numbers beyond counting, tens of thousands at a time, sent into the mines beneath the 14 Flames to dig for gold and for the fire the dragon lords needed. The Valyrians did not simply rule with dragons. They remade themselves with sorcery. Over the centuries, they used blood magic and arts now lost to shape their own bodies, breeding for the silver hair and the purple eyes that marked their bloodline, breeding for the resistance to fire and the bond with dragons that no other people possessed. They forged steel that has never been equaled and built roads so perfect they remain flawless today, running through lands where every other work of man has crumbled to ruin. Only a few hundred of their blades still exist, passed down as priceless heirlooms, and no smith alive knows how to make another. Power in Valyria was not held by a single king, but shared among some 40 rival families of dragon lords who bound themselves by blood and by marriage of brother to sister, keeping the bloodline and the bond with the dragons pure. For 5,000 years, the Valyrian freehold was the center of the world. No power could stand against it. No army could face its dragons. In 5,000 years, they were never conquered, never defeated, never brought low by any enemy at all. What happened to them was worse than any defeat, because it came from nowhere, and it came all at once. It is called the Doom of Valyria. In a single day, the 14 Flames, the very volcanoes the Valyrians had drawn their dragons from, all erupted at once. The land cracked and shattered and sank. Every hill for hundreds of miles exploded. The great city of Valyria was swallowed by fire and sea in a matter of hours. Dragons died, screaming in the sky. The dragon lords, the most powerful bloodlines the world had ever produced, were wiped out almost to the last soul. The heart of the greatest civilization in history became a smoking ruin of drowned islands and boiling water, a place so cursed that no sailor will approach it even now. It was not a war, and not a slow decline across the ages, but a single day. The mightiest people who ever lived, undone not by any rival, but by the exact power they had built their entire existence upon. The dragons came out of the fire, and in the end, the fire took everything back. Only one Valyrian family of importance survived, because they had left the peninsula years before, exiled to a lonely rock in the west on the strength of a single girl's prophetic dream. That family was House Targaryen. Every dragon, every silver-haired king, every war of the centuries that followed traces back to those few survivors of a people who were untouchable for 5,000 years and who were erased in an afternoon, the first men. Before the great houses, before the 7 kingdoms, before any of the names we know, there were the first men, and they were exactly what their name says. They were the first humans to ever set foot in Westeros. They came from the east tens of thousands of years ago, crossing a great land bridge of stone, with bronze swords and horses, into a land that was not empty. And this is the beginning of one of the oldest and bloodiest stories in the entire history of the world. Westeros already belonged to someone. It belonged to the children of the forest, an ancient non-human people, and to the giants, who had lived there in peace for uncounted ages before a single human arrived. The first men looked at this ancient, sacred land and did what men do. They came in such numbers that the children could not stop them, and they cleared the forests for their fields and chopped down the weirwoods, the sacred white trees with faces carved into them that the children held holy. To the first men, these were just timber. The children fought back with magic the first men could not comprehend, and for a long time it was a war neither side could win. And then the children did something desperate. Using their magic, they are said to have shattered a land bridge in the far south, trying to stop more men from crossing over. After generations of bloodshed neither side could end, the first men and the children laid down their weapons and made peace. They met on a small island in the middle of a great lake and swore a pact. The first men would keep to the open lands and leave the deep forests to the children, and they would stop cutting down the weirwoods forever. That place is still called the Isle of Faces, and here is the part that matters most. The first men did not just make peace with the children, they adopted their gods. Alongside the children and the giants, the first men also stood against the first coming of the others in the long night, and afterward helped raise the wall. They took up the worship of the old gods of the forest, the nameless spirits of stream and stone and tree, and they kept that faith for thousands of years. The first men had no written language beyond runes carved in stone, and their weapons were bronze, while later peoples brought iron and steel. Every ancient house that claims the deepest roots, the Starks and the old northern families, carries their blood still, and the descendants of the first men in the north keep the old gods to this day, long after the children who taught them that faith faded from the world. The Andals. Thousands of years after the first men had settled into their long peace with the children, a new people came across the narrow sea from the east, and they did not come to share the land. They came to take it, and they came in the name of new gods. The Andals were a people of iron. They came out of a land called Andalos across the narrow sea, driven, the songs say, by the faith itself. Where the first men fought with bronze, the Andals came with iron swords and armor, and that difference alone was enough to shatter the old order. With them came the things the South still lives by: knighthood and the anointed knight, the written word in place of carved runes, and stone castles raised where the first men had known only wooden halls. But it was not just their weapons, it was their faith. The Andals worshipped the Seven, a single god with 7 faces, the father and the mother, the warrior and the maiden, the smith and the crone and the stranger. When the Andals landed, they did not merely defeat the kingdoms of the first men. They set out to destroy everything the old world held sacred. They marched into the forests and cut down the weirwoods, the same sacred trees the first men had sworn 8,000 years before to protect forever. They hunted the children of the forest wherever they could find them, driving the survivors into hiding so complete that most of Westeros would come to believe they had never existed at all. Everything the Pact on the Isle of Faces had preserved, the Andals set out to burn. One kingdom at a time, they conquered the South. The whole culture of the South, its knighthood, its chivalry, its towering religion, all of it is Andal to the bone. But here is the one place the flood could not reach: the North. When the Andals tried to cross the great natural barrier that divides the continent, the old First Men kings of the North threw them back for thousands of years. The North never fell, and that is why, to this day, it is different from everything below it. The Northerners still keep the old gods. They still kneel before the weirwoods. They still carry the blood of the first men almost undiluted, because the one people who came to erase all of that could never break through. The Andals are the reason most of Westeros looks the way it does, the reason for its gods, its knights, its septs, and its very language, an entire continent's culture imposed by conquest. The only region they never broke was the North, held by the old First Men kings, which is why the North alone still keeps the old gods, the Iron Islands, a scatter of bleak, storm-battered rocks off the west coast of Westeros, where the soil is poor and almost nothing worth having can be grown or dug out of the ground. And out of that hard place, they built their whole culture around a single terrible idea. That idea is called the Old Way, and once you understand it, you understand everything about the Ironborn. In their eyes, there are 2 ways to acquire something. A man can pay the gold price, buying or trading, or earning it with honest labor. Or he can pay the iron price, taking it from a dead enemy he has killed with his own hands. And to the Ironborn, only the iron price carries any honor at all. A crown, a sword, a wife, if it was not taken by force from someone strong enough to try to keep it, it is worth nothing. To buy something is to admit you were too weak to take it. For thousands of years, the Ironborn lived as raiders and reavers. They built longships and sailed out to burn coastal villages, steal gold and grain, and carry off 2 kinds of captive: thralls, who were worked as bondservants, and women taken as what they call salt wives, seized by the iron price like any other plunder. Their entire religion is built to justify the killing. In their oldest legends, they were ruled by the Grey King, who reigned for 1,000 years and took a mermaid to wife, and in the ancient days, their kings were chosen at a gathering called the Kingsmoot, where captains raised up one of their own to rule. They worship the drowned god, a deity of the deep sea, and their most sacred belief is that a true Ironborn does not fear death by drowning. A people who do not fear death make the most terrifying raiders imaginable, because the one thing that stops most men has been carved out of them and replaced with a promise. There was a time when this worked spectacularly. In the ancient days, the Ironborn ruled far more than their barren islands, pushing onto the mainland and seizing the riverlands. For a while, the Reavers of the Salt Sea were one of the great powers of Westeros. The Free Folk. South of the Great Wall, they are called Willings, and the word is meant as an insult, a way of saying savages, something less than civilized men. But they do not call themselves that. They call themselves the Free Folk, and that name is not pride or boasting. It is the single most important thing about them, and it is the thing that condemns them. The Free Folk are the descendants of the first men, the same ancient blood as the oldest northern houses, and in all that time, they held to one belief above all others. No man rules another. The Free Folk kneel to no king. They are not one people but many, spread thin across a huge and brutal land. Raiders and cave dwellers, cannibal clans of the frozen Frostfangs, the disciplined thens of a hidden valley, spearwives who fight beside the men, and skin changers who slip their minds into the beasts they hunt. A man among the Free Folk follows another, only for as long as he chooses to, and the moment he stops respecting the man leading him, he simply walks away. Their leaders are not born to rule. A man becomes a leader only by earning it, and there have only been a handful of true ones in thousands of years, because getting the Free Folk to follow anyone at all is nearly impossible. They call such a man the King Beyond the Wall. And here is the cruel irony at the heart of their freedom. It has made them weak in the way that matters most, because they will not organize, will not submit to a single command, will not build the kind of ordered kingdom that could defend itself. They have spent their entire history as scattered clans, feuding and raiding one another, unable to unite against anything. The people who prize freedom above all else are, for that very reason, almost impossible to save, and they need saving because they live in the shadow of the oldest terror in the world. Long ago, when that enemy first came in the age called the Long Night, it was beaten back and the great wall of ice was raised to keep it out, with the Free Folk left on the far side of it. Beyond their lands, in the deepest cold of the far north, lie the others, the White Walkers, an ancient enemy of ice that raises the dead to serve it. The Free Folk know this threat is real in a way the comfortable kingdoms of the south have long forgotten. They have seen the dead walk, and their entire desperate history in the modern age comes down to a single, tragic goal: the Dornishmen. Dorne is the southernmost land of Westeros, a harsh country of deserts and dry red mountains and blistering sun. And its people are unlike anywhere else too, because Dorne is the one place where a third wave of settlers arrived, and instead of erasing what came before, blended into it completely. Long after the first men and the Andals, a people called the Rhoynar came across the sea from the east, fleeing the dragons of Valyria, who had burned their armies and destroyed their great river cities. They were led by a warrior queen named Nymeria, and they landed in Dorne, but they did not conquer it in the usual way. Their queen married the local Dornish lord, and the two peoples fused. First men, Andal and Rhoynar, blood all ran together, and out of that mixing came a culture found nowhere else in the Seven Kingdoms. The Rhoynar had once been a river people who worshipped the Mother Rhoyne and were famed for their water magic, and though most of that faded in the deserts of Dorne, their laws and their customs did not. The Rhoynar brought their own ways, and Dorne kept them. Here, unlike anywhere else in Westeros, the eldest child inherits regardless of son or daughter, and women rule in their own right, lead armies, and hold lands. In a continent where nearly every other kingdom passes everything to the eldest son and treats a woman's claim as an afterthought, Dorne stands completely apart, and it has for thousands of years, because a queen carried her people's customs across the sea and refused to give them up. When dragons came to conquer Westeros and bind the whole continent into a single realm, every kingdom fell. Every single one bent the knee before the fire, because how could bronze or iron or steel stand against dragons? Every kingdom except Dorne. The Dornish did not try to meet the dragons in open battle, because they knew that meant death. Instead, they melted away into their deserts and their mountains. The Dothraki. Far to the east, across the narrow sea and beyond the free cities, lies a vast ocean of grass that stretches farther than any eye can see, and across it ride a people who have built their entire civilization on the refusal to stop moving. They are the Dothraki, and to understand them, you have to understand that everything they believe flows from the back of a horse. The Dothraki are horse lords, and that phrase does not begin to capture how total the bond is. A Dothraki learns to ride before he learns to walk. They eat horse, they wear horse, they measure a man's worth by his mount, and hold it shameful, almost unthinkable, for a great man to travel any way but on horseback. Above all, the Dothraki live to raid. A horde of tens of thousands of riders, led by a warlord they call a Khal, descends on the farms and cities at the edge of their grasslands, and takes everything, gold, goods, and above all people, dragging thousands away into slavery to be sold in the great slave cities. This is not seen as cruelty among the Dothraki. It is simply strength doing what strength does. Their entire value system is built on a single idea, that the strong take from the weak, and that any man who cannot hold what he has does not deserve to keep it. A Khal rules only for as long as he is strong. The moment he shows frailty, the moment he is wounded or grows old or falls from his horse, his people turn on him without hesitation, because a Khal who cannot ride is no Khal at all. And there is a grim final destination for those who fall. In the heart of the grasslands lies Vaes Dothrak, their one holy city, a place with no walls where no blade may be drawn, the children of the forest. Long before the first men, before any human being had ever set foot in Westeros, the land belonged to a people who were not human at all. They are called the children of the forest, and their story is the oldest and the saddest in the entire history of the world, because it is the story of a whole people fading so completely from existence that the world came to doubt they had ever lived. The children were small, no taller than a human child, which is where their name comes from, though they were, in fact, immensely old. They did not farm, build cities of stone, or forge metal. They lived in the deep forests, in caves, and in the hollows of great trees, and hunted with weapons of stone and bone and dragon glass, the black volcanic glass that would later prove to be one of the only things that could kill the very terror they are said to have made. They were few, even at their height, for they bred slowly and lived long. They had magic, real and deep, and woven into the living world itself. The children worshipped the old gods, the nameless spirits of the earth and the trees, and it was they who carved the faces into the weirwoods, the sacred white trees that would become the heart of the oldest religion in Westeros. Their wise ones, called greenseers, could see through the eyes of those carved trees across great distances and even across time, and could slip their minds into the bodies of beasts, seeing through the eyes of wolves and ravens. And then the first men came, and everything ended. The war between the children and the first men lasted centuries, and it was a war the children were always going to lose, because the humans were larger, more numerous, and armed with bronze the children could not match. The children fought back with the only thing they had, their magic. And the old tales say it was the children who, in a moment of ultimate desperation, created the greatest terror the world would ever know. To stop the endless tide of men, their greenseers are said to have taken a captured man, driven a shard of dragon glass into his heart, and worked a magic meant to make a weapon of ice against the invaders. That weapon turned on everyone. The thing they made became the others, the White Walkers, the walking cold that raises the dead, and it grew beyond anything they could control. The oldest tales suggest the very apocalypse that haunts the world may have been born from a people trying only to survive their own extinction. In the end, the children made peace with the first men, and gave the humans their greatest gifts, their gods, and the knowledge of the weirwoods, the giants. Alongside the children, in the same ancient world before men, there lived the giants. They are among the oldest living things in the world. The giants are real, but they are not the monsters of the tales men tell in the South. Those stories describe them as impossibly huge, dwelling in colossal castles, boiling men in great pots, and they are almost entirely false. They stand perhaps twice the height of a man, massively built, covered in coarse hair against the killing cold, more like something between a man and a great beast than the giants of a child's story. In the oldest days, Their strength was counted a weapon in itself. There was a time when giants roamed across the whole of Westeros, in the ages when it belonged to them and to the children. But like the children, they were pushed north and north again as men spread across the land, cutting the forests and claiming the open country, until the only place left to the giants was the harsh, dead cold beyond the wall. They do not build castles or forge weapons of steel. They wield uprooted trees and clubs of raw wood, tie boulders to the ends to make crude mauls, and ride mammoths, the great shaggy beasts of the far north, into battle. They have their own tongue, the old tongue that the first men once shared, and they live scattered among the free folk beyond the wall, sometimes at odds with them and sometimes beside them. The dragons. Dragons are the most powerful creatures in this world, the single force that decided the fate of every people who ever lived. They are living weapons of mass destruction, capable of burning cities to ash and turning stone castles into rivers of molten rock. Their fire is hot enough to melt steel, and a single grown dragon can do what 10,000 soldiers cannot. For thousands of years, they were the sole possession of the Valyrians, the reason no power on earth could stand against them. And here's the truth at the center of every dragon's story. To hold a dragon is to hold the world, and to hold the world is to lose everything. The Valyrians built the greatest civilization in history on the backs of dragons, and dragons, in the form of the volcanoes they were drawn from, destroyed it in a single day. One family of Valyrian dragon lords survived, the Targaryens, and with just 3 dragons, they did what whole empires could not. They conquered nearly the entire continent of Westeros, melting the swords of kings and binding 7 warring kingdoms into a single realm beneath their fire. 3 dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, remade the map of the world. Balerion the Black Dread was the greatest of them, old enough to have been hatched in Valyria before the Doom, with fire hot enough to melt stone and wings that could blot out a town. But the story of the Targaryen dragons is the story of Valyria written smaller, and it carries the same terrible lesson. The dragons that gave the Targaryens the world also destroyed them. In a great civil war remembered as the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryens turned their dragons against one another, and dragon fought dragon in the skies until nearly all of them lay dead, burned or torn apart by their own kind. And a people who had ruled the world on the strength of their dragons found, when the dragons were gone, that they were only men after all, and men can be overthrown like any other. The last dragons dwindled, growing smaller and sicker in captivity, until the final one died, a stunted, wretched thing. And for 150 years the dragons were gone from the world entirely, remembered as skulls on a wall. And here is the thing that should stay with you. Every people we have spoken of lived in the shadow of the dragons, whether they knew it or not. The Valyrians rose and fell by them. The first men and the Andals built their kingdoms only to have those kingdoms melted into one by dragonfire. Dorne earned its greatest glory as the one land dragons could not conquer. The whole shape of the world was drawn and redrawn by these creatures. And then they vanished, and the world went on as though they had never been, until whispers began that somewhere in the ashes of the east, 3 had hatched again. The whole shape of the world, every border and every crown, was drawn and redrawn by these creatures, and then they vanished, remembered only as skulls on a wall, until whispers began that somewhere in the east 3 had hatched again.